Let's come to our 30-second presentation for this year of the Parayana. We have been moving in very large layers, and the next very large layer to come into play for a while is Islam. We've been looking at the way in which civilization has a dynamic, and that the dynamic in the universe, in the cosmos, is time. The most primordial energy in the universe, in the cosmos, is time as a dimension. So the emphasis is that time is the dimension. It's the first dimension, but time emerges spontaneously, not instantly. Once time has occurred, its emergence has occurred spontaneously, then one can have instantaneity, and space instantly blossoms from time in three dimensions, a triad, a triple. So that there is a primordial geometry between 0, 1, and 3, with the illusion that the 0 cannot count. And so to make up the triad, the triplet, we count the 2. 1, 2, 3. And as George Gamow entitled one of his great books from the 1950s, I remember buying a copy in the Mentor paperback, 1, 2, 3, ... infinity. With infinity being the word, not the symbol, not the Mobius strip. And as I related, I got to meet George Gamow in 1960 at Sequoia National Park, where I was the head porter, and he was staying for a week in his red car, convertible, with matching elkskin suitcases, and his beautiful blonde wife. And I thought, this is a physicist, George Gamow. It was wonderful, burly, elegant, and dear. 1, 2, 3, ... infinity. Once one has the relationship of 1, 2, 3, and understands that 0 is the field out of which they occur, the arithmetic continuity of proceeding by ones, 1, 2, 3, increases with the sense then that whatever is because it is definable, is because it has a registry, but the articulation of its registry is that all of these ones in their arithmetic continuity occur in a 0 field. So that the ones, whatever is particality, whatever is particular, whatever is definable, occurs as a quantum. And the articulation of the quantum is because there's not something in between them and the next, but that they occur within a 0 field. So that the articulation is because the entire field is not only a 0 field, but a fertile 0 field. So that on a very deep, high dharma, one would like to know, why is the zero field fertile? And the traditional response is that that is a mystery. It's deeper than understanding an answer to a question which is already defined and quantized, which means that the question itself has no bearing whatsoever in terms of the zero field that is fertile. So that there is a limitation, and the limitation can only be sensed when there is not the perception, but the awareness initially. The awareness that in between the ones is the space, not the space between the ones, but the space that occurs as the field within which the ones are distinguishable. So that the energy between the ones that makes them quanta is a fertile zero field. And we call this the quantum field. The quanta within the field. And so the latest thrust in 21st century physics is to understand, to be aware that there is a contemplation about the quantum field. It's called quantum field theory. There is a contemplation which is glaringly obvious once one raises awareness to consciousness. And in order to raise awareness from the natural cycle to consciousness in further dimensions, more than 4, from 5 on, one then has to have a contemplative consciousness which is not locked into the there in space-time. And we revert back and do a do-si-do instead of time-space, which it should really be. We call it space-time, and accurately, because in the universe, space-time is the way in which they are integrated, because the whole emergence into quantification is integral. Every aspect, all the time, everywhere, is an integral. You can have awareness, but you can't have consciousness. And consciousness occurs in another field. Not in the zero field. It's another field which is an infinite field. And that infinite field is a complement to the integral. It's differential. And so the differential field of consciousness, the traditional way which I use, is that it's accessed when you mature awareness through its complexities into vision. So vision is that field of differential consciousness, and nature is that field of zero, which is fertilized because those two fields like each other. And because they like each other, they have something more mysterious than synergy. And that mysteriousness reveals as a possibility in consciousness, as a glimmer, an insight, a spark, that there must be a third field. And the time-honored high Dharma way of saying that's the field of the real. But for the field of the real, which is the fertilized zero field, space has to undergo a double transform and carry with it time through that double transform. And the first transform is where it's still space-time, and the second transform is when it's time-space. And the space of time-space we call conveniently hyperspace, a 10-dimensional hyperspace. And the saying in string theory, there are three kinds of time, three kinds of space, but only one kind of time. It's counterintuitive, it's counter-awareness, it's even paradoxical when one in the high Dharma understands it. But in reality, it's simpler than 1, 2, 3. The fact that babies smile is mysterious. Those toothless grins, which are not a response to some kind of a stimulus, but they're a sharing of a continuity, a continuum. Because they are real, there is a field of differential consciousness operative as well as the integral field, zero field of nature. So the baby and its emergence as a birth is an incredible, not just a metaphor or even event, but a revelation. And that there can be a second birth, a rebirth, means that one has gone into the differential conscious field, has begun, and it's like having taken your first step into the surf of the ocean. And as you get used to it, as you get used to the fact that you can swim in it, you can sail in it, you can dive in it, and by the 21st century you can dive 7 miles deep like James Cameron did. Or you can go so far above it that you can see the entirety of the ocean is just a metaphor of the world, which is a world indeed, but it is a planet in a much larger ocean. An ocean, as the Islamic saying, in which no ore is dipped. The vast desert is an ocean in which no ore is dipped. And so one needs to understand, to mature your awareness that you are dynamic within an oceanic mystery. And this is one of the qualities of Islam. Because in Islam, there was no period in which a scholastic crystallization of snippets of wisdom being pastiched together as some kind of rational structure, which was simply an idea, simply a mental picture, if you will. And so it's important. And one of the great figures in the 20th century was Henri Corbin. Henri Corbin grew up to be a French savant, meaning a very wise person. There can be female savants. My spirit mother was a female French savant. Henri Corbin lived 75 years, and his first really impressive book that came out, reprinted here, but an early edition when Shambhala Books was still just a little tiny thing. Shambhala originally was a bookstore in Berkeley that was in the basement of a building owned by the wife of Mo, who owned Mo's Books, and they built from there. It's called The Man of Light in Iranian Sufism. And it's interesting because Corbin, being a savant, understood all the layered ways in which he had come to be understanding about the centrality of the idea of the man of light was not at all the consciousness of the man of light. It was gratifying to be able to have that idea, that conception of it, as the center, as even the axis, not just a dot center, but a whole axis, which gives a rotational energy, not only rotational clockwise, but rotational anti-clockwise as well, and that double chiral, double helix of the dynamic of rotational time in its symmetries will give us the double helix, which is a structure which allows for all of the double transforms to have their quanta depositions within a dynamic of a double rotational dynamic of time that also allows for what was beautifully called here in Los Angeles in the 1950s when Aldous Huxley and Christopher Isherwood and Swami Prabhavananda were making a translation of the Upanishads for the Vedanta Center. And they called their little book a little mentor book, like George Gamo's 1, 2, 3, Infinity that we've talked about. And they called the little volume The Breath of the Eternal. The breath, that inhalation and that exhalation has a deep symmetry, and its symmetry is such that it evokes a second symmetry. The first symmetry, breathing in and breathing out, is universal, respiration. It's natural. But when that naturalness is put out of awareness, into the differential field of consciousness, now there is a realization that there is a imperceptible but nevertheless real turning point. When you breathe in, there is a microsecond, or if you like, a nanosecond, or if you want to get really scientific, a picosecond, or if you want to get really 21st century, a femtosecond, or deeper into the century, an attosecond, regardless. And one can go on that way, believe me, for a very long time. There's more particularity available even now in the 21st century than you could shake an idea at. A book was just published this year called The Powers of 10. Gerard de Hooft and a friend of his published it in the Netherlands. The Dutch are always far out. And they still are. That is the almost imperceptible and yet to differential consciousness, it is recognizable turning point where you've stopped breathing in and you have not yet begun to breathe out. It's the pause that refreshes. And it happens the same in the exhalation. That cognate, time infinitesimal, occurs when you stop breathing out and you start breathing in. And so in a yoga, there is a balance of two symmetries. One of them is a symmetry of breathing in and breathing out, just like a piston in a mechanical dynamic. But there is another pair that is the axial context of the zero field, and that is those pivots where you shift to the other aspect of what is seemingly the power in the piston, and it's only that the power is in those infinitesimal attosecond pauses that are really axial, because they are the fertile zero field that is giving spontaneous birth to what is actual. Not just microsecond by microsecond, or picosecond by picosecond, or femtosecond. The motion of molecules is femto. At Caltech, an Egyptian genius from Alexandria in the 20th century, Ahmad Zewal, is the one who did the first textbooks, 2 big volumes on femtochemistry. I'll bring them next week if you like to see them. But their atomic movement level, not just the molecular, but the way that atomic movement happens is the attosecond level. And it's really on the attosecond level that there is a contact with the integral coming spontaneously with time and then instantly with space in 3 dimensions. That 4-dimensional space-time has a quality where the 4 together, 2 and 2 pairs together, will make a square. And it's not just that there is a mental frame, although that is how the language goes, and one speaks of within the frame, the really big frame is the big picture. That's chicken feed. You're just feeding the chicks in the hen yard. A yoga has that quality of being able to show it's not the posture of the breathing, it's the spontaneous participation in that other axial, what would be a zero now is an infinite conscious field. And so one then says in a really sophisticated, high Dharma yoga that one then practices pranayama. Pranayama is the ability to give a name. And the name doesn't come because you examine something and, oh, it figures this way and that. It's spontaneous. A name for real is the seed of a poetic. And if you don't know that, you need to continue to learn. And if you forget it, learn more. One of the great scrolls in China, done about the time that they did their first printing. The first book was printed in 898. It's the Diamond Sutra, the Vajrachandika Sutra, the Diamond Cutter Sutra. Because the jewel is not there in nature, in the raw. The jewel must be cut by facets. And those facets have a geometry. They're not just crystals with facets, they're jewels because there are conscious super facets that are put in. And when you have a diamond that is really cut fabulously, it has a scintillating power of disclosing not the glint of the lights so much, yes, that, but one becomes spontaneously aware that this happens before instantaneously, that jewel is real because it doesn't stay put in the universe, which indeed is made instantaneously because of space. The integral happens instantaneously, or even spontaneously because of time. Time happens a quadrillionth of an attosecond before space. Time is spontaneous, space is instantaneous, presuming that there's time already. It is a quality where it is important to not be real, but to let occur what is real, not what is real, or even reality. To say, as 50 years ago, let it be, is again feeding chicks in the rooster yard. It is not it. When the older Alan Watts understood that all of his Zen lectures had been so much fluff, he wrote a short little book called It. It was like a mea culpa confession. When he died, he was only 57 in Mill Valley because he kept trying to juice it up with drugs and quip mania. The young Alan Watts, I heard him lecture at the University of Wisconsin when he was fresh from England with the short cut hair and the olive drab suit and the beautiful tie, and just absolutely a magician. At 57, he was worn out. It's not a question of that kind of force feeding to get super or hyper. Super and hyper have been here longer than the universe. But they are free in the zero field and free in the infinite field and courtesy of the field of the real. So humility is not a small thing at all. At all. In Islam, which was never subjected to the granulation by the scholastic reductionism, which began to come in actually in the 300s, right after the Council of Nicaea, 325 AD, which was overseen by a man named Eusebius. He was born and raised in Caesarea on the coast and was magnificent. His whole heritage came because of education that was set up by Origen, who had learned it in Alexandria from old Pantaeus, and his classmate was Clement of Alexandria. And so Eusebius knew what he was doing. And his History of the Church is one of the great classics, and hardly read anymore because, for one thing, he says that the earliest trace that we have of the way in which we Christians do things is in a Jew named Philo. And when we read, especially Philo's On the Contemplative Life, we can recognize they're already then and there Christians, because we have the same processes that we do, language that we use. Philo wrote in Greek, and the Greek word for contemplation is theoria, out of which we get theory. A theory expresses that already one has moved into a differential conscious dimension, a fifth dimension, a fifth business that makes the universe magical, and then it makes it artistic. Because when one is working with 5 dimensions, spontaneously what comes out is art. Artistic. It's in the elan of differential consciousness to spontaneously begin something. You're not sure exactly what it is. You're not caring exactly what it is. You're not even caring that it is. It's happening. A 60s phrase that's still applicable. It's happening. And so one plays, but one plays like a divine child. Here it is. And that 6th dimension of art has a stability because the pairings with the other pairings now has a 3rd pairing. And those 3 pairs together are stable. They're stable. And so once you have a this and a that with an other and t'other, and put a 3rd pair in, that 3rd pair cinches that second 2 pairs. So that square now becomes a cubic. It becomes a 3-dimensional square, a cube. And so the cubedness, coming right back and bringing arithmetic as the beginnings of mathematics into play, you realize now that there is a grand synergy between squares and pairs and triple pairs and cubes. And both of them have a point of emergence, which we can call 1. And so the ancient Pythagorean way to teach it some 2,500 years ago, people were going to school, learning for the first time that the squares and the cubes are relatable because their ratio will always have a oneness, a unity to them. So you go 1, 2, 4, 8, 1, 3, 9, 27. The cubing of things becomes related to the squaring of things. And this is rather universal. In astronomy, it's called Bode's law. The distance, the stable distance between all of the planets around our sun, our star, have the squares of space and the cubes of time related, and if you figure out what both of them are and the answer has a final resolution into oneness, then your math is right. Your celestial mechanics are right. And the first person to do that lived in the time a little bit later, because he lived longer than Shakespeare, and that was Kepler. And he found, well, it isn't just that Mars then definitely has this kind of place, but that the orbit shows that that place is not circular because it has an extension and is actually an ellipse instead of a circle. In cubic space, it's an egg. And after we come back from the break, we'll take a deeper look than this. This is just setting up, not for a card trick. We don't need cards. Let's take a break.